I'm going to go through the whole thing.
And then I just handed you out what request for the permits. Which will be discussed at the next meeting.
Okay. Are we ready?
We are.
Good. So the village had asked our firm to prepare a feasibility study for a community dock. And we had a scope of services that was agreed upon, and the intent was to determine location, environmental constraints, regulatory permits that are needed, and to come up with recommendations so that the board could consider that and potentially move forward on this initiative. So our presentation will go through a little bit of the historical context, which I'm sure all of you know, but I find it interesting, and we always like to start a study like this with the past conditions. Overview of the existing environmental conditions, the regulatory parameters, and then, as I said, the overall feasibility. So we're talking about, as it was explained to us, that the intended location would be at California Beach. Obviously, Port Jefferson Harbor is to the east and northeast, and the Poquott community is to the west and southwest. So this is part of the site, and we found in the historic book of the Setauquets the old oyster house, which is kind of interesting because I would expect that the piling system that's there is related to that old building. I think those dates are wrong. 1883 to 1934 is my understanding of the origins of that building. And, you know, there were other activities in the area, and then, of course, the California Grove amusement park area to the south, and, you know, there's a rich history. So this is a 1947 aerial photograph on the left, and the remnants of the old dock and the old portions of the structure and maybe pilings and support are more evident in the photograph on the left, and the one on the right is a 1962 photograph. These were also helpful kind of in looking at shoaling, shoreline features, you know, a variety of conditions that we'll consider that really bring it to today's date. So the village has identified a dock as an infrastructure-related goal, and looked at, you know, any time within the next 5 to 10 years previously. And this was identified as part of a survey that was done for the 2011 master plan update. And that was included in the appendix of that document. And of course, we have a couple of pictures just of the shoreline area that will explain more. So the existing conditions, from a DEC perspective, there's really no vegetated tidal wetlands. Spartina alterniflora is typically in the intertidal zone. That is not present in this specific area, although there are some stretches along Poquott's beaches that have it. So the wetlands are really the mud flats, the shoals, and the bars that are offshore from both mean low water and mean high water. I'm sure you all know, especially the boaters, the tidal range is pretty great at 6.6 feet in range from low to high. And mean high is at about the 5 or 6 foot contour topographically. And that's important for us when we do initial feasibility because activities above the 10-foot contour don't require a DEC permit. The conditions are such that we need to make note of the ferry. There's wake. We've been involved with prior studies that considered this, and it certainly affects shoreline conditions, particularly at low tide when the boat displaces a lot of water. So consideration of wake and wake activity and wave activity is very important. Also the sea conditions. You're in a fairly protected area, but there are certain angles of the wind that can create a fairly strong wind-driven wave. So to the northwest and to the south and to the southwest, in those areas, you're really not exposed, but to the north and the northeast, there's quite a bit of exposure. So this fetch really ranges from maybe 200 feet to the south to as much as 8,000 feet across the harbor out to Mount Misery Point. so that north wind, northeast, or northeast wind can kick up a little bit of a sea condition. And of course, during winter conditions, we're just coming out of those, and each year is a little bit different. But you will get saltwater slush, you'll get ice, you'll get periodic freezing. Just was out at Old Man's Boatyard in Mount Sinai, and they had quite a bit of damage from ice in the back of the harbor, migrating, through the ebb tide flow and damaging their system of docks and piers. So that needs to be considered, and it's really something that is part of an ongoing maintenance program that you just need to kind of budget for and understand. So this is the NOAA chart, and I have a blow-up of this, but basically Port Jeff Harbor, it's showing the federal channel, which is maintained to a certain depth. We're all familiar with the ferry operations. Tankers, there have been more real tankers coming in, as well as gas barges. Gravel barges are still operating, and so that's certainly a dominant feature of the harbor. It's one of the reasons that we love the harbor. It's a working harbor. Overall harbor conditions and water depths are shown. The white is the deeper areas. Right off Washington Street and California Beach Park, there are some shoals shown on the nautical chart. And so this graphic just shows the relation of the site to overall Port Jefferson Harbor. And this is a blow-up that shows kind of a shallow bar, and you'll see this in the aerial photographs, and we've certainly documented it through soundings that, there is a shoal that needs to be considered just in terms of, number one, length of a pier, number two, the ability to install floats, because the DEC does not like floats sitting on the bay bottom because of impact to benthic life, and just the overall design and configuration of any installation. So we also looked at the harbor management plan. The village of Poquott is a participant with Oldfield, Belterre, and Port Jefferson, as well as the town of Brookhaven, in a plan. And certainly we have seen, and I live on the harbor as well, we've seen a number of docks installed. This village has been cautious and certainly looks to regulate and not overpopulate the shoreline with docks. Belterre, a number of docks have come in. And so basically DEC does find them to be presumptively compatible uses. You have to consider proper design. You don't want to induce scouring or any of the negative impacts, but they're generally compatible and can be situated on the harbor. This particular installation will go into a little bit more about some of the things that I think help to justify it from a feasibility standpoint. So this is a table that outlines the regulatory requirements. We need a DEC Article 25 permit. We need a New York State Department of State Coastal Consistency Determination. We need a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers individual permit. And we need a Town of Brookhaven Chapter 81 Waterways permit, as well as some type of permit from the village of Poquott. And we've been in touch with the building inspector, and it's expected that plans that would be prepared for the other agencies would be suitable for review by the village. And the village attorney has indicated that there is a moratorium that would either have to be expire, be amended in some way in order to have the village act. We did touch base with the town of Brookhaven. They didn't indicate any specific requirements. They also indicated that municipal docks specifically don't have to conform to their specific dimensional requirements that apply to other commercial or residential docks. The Army Corps is fairly straightforward. We were hoping it was a nationwide permit, but it didn't quite qualify, so we do have to submit to the Army Corps. They're used to seeing them. DOS consistency should not be an issue based on the harbor management plan. And the DEC typically would look for docks no more than 4 feet in width, 4-inch to 10-inch pilings, depending on the type of installation, and not inhibiting pedestrian movement along the beach. And that's typically handled by either stairs on each side or putting the stairs far enough seaward so that you can pass by it at high water or pass under it, because we expect there would be a fixed portion that you would pass under, below the mean high tide line during low water events. So from a regulatory standpoint, we do believe that it is feasible and subject to surveyor grade soundings and final design, we would expect we could secure permits. So just in terms of operational and design considerations, our understanding, and we interviewed a couple of people within the village and basically had the proposal that outlined our understanding, and that was that this is intended to provide ease of access for village residents. It's not intended to be a marina. It's not intended to have permanent slips. It's for transient short-term use. In this case, and we put it under bullet 3, passenger loading, supply loading, perhaps boat maintenance. We expect it will have electricity and water, really just for the convenience of washing down and maintaining boats, cleaning boats up. You do have the dinghy rack, which will still be in use and continue to be used. And quite honestly, I've been boating on the harbor for over 40 years, if not more. And, used to row out to my boat for the first 30, 35 years of boating. And it was always a little difficult if we were going on a cruise or bringing passengers out, to get out to the boat. So I solved that by joining Poquott Yacht Club, now Port Jefferson Yacht Club. And so I do feel that there's substantial justification for this type of facility for the village of Poquott. It's a boating community. It's a waterfront community. You would still row out to your boat, and then if you had supplies or picking up passengers, you could easily come into a community pier for that purpose. So we know that there were 4 8-by-20-foot floats that were donated for use by the village. Those tend to be expensive, or they have to be made. Port Jefferson Yacht Club maintains their own. I was out at Old Man's, as I said yesterday. They're rebuilding floats and building some new ones, and you have them. So keep in mind that it may be good to keep a spare in case you have to rotate floats for maintenance. Obviously, you have to have a place to store it. But we're looking at this really depending on water depths, and we'll show you the configurations that we examined. We don't think 4 floats will fit in total, and I'll show you why. It's also possible that one of the additional floats could be used for some of the larger dinghies that are difficult to get out of the rack, difficult to launch, and it may make sense to provide space on one of these floats. We did look at locations both north and south of the boat ramp and have some considerations on that I'll describe. We expect that just based on the length to get to good water, based on the DEC requirements, that some moorings may need to be moved, but there's no major displacement, and certainly the benefit of having the dock itself, would be part of that consideration. We expect that there'd be a linear fixed pier with a linear ramp to a float, which goes out into the waterway. And so the south side of that would be the most protected. And we thought it may make sense to have an L shape at the end of the fixed pier, come back with a ramp if the water depth is sufficient, and have one float in that location on the south side that may get a little protection from wind and waves. And the north side of the pier would just be open, used for viewing, fishing, if that's suitable and permitted by the village, and just enjoyment by the village residents of the beautiful waterfront. So, in our opinion, the preferred placement is really along the central shoreline, and that's based on that sandbar that we noticed in the nautical charts, the distance from neighboring properties. We looked at a location very close to the existing dinghy rack, and that would really interfere with the south property line. It would be within what the village has as a setback that may or may not apply to this, but certainly is a consideration. And we felt that was not quite as good. And also, it doesn't really provide a constant elevation for access and convenient access from the parking lot. So again, we looked at 2 options that you'll see. As I said, some select reconfiguration of mooring locations. Again, no traditional slips. These are the recommendations for it to be used for transient purposes. I talked about the number of floats and the use of gangways or ramps which are aluminum with rails. They're prefab manufactured, easy to obtain. They hinge into the fixed pier, and they have rollers on the float so that they, basically the ramp goes up and down with mean high and mean low water. And just based on the fact that it's used by village residents, they're already there at the moorings, they have a dinghy. We don't feel that additional upland facilities are necessary. Parking is adequate. There's really nothing that changes the pattern of use of the waterfront, in our opinion, to a significant degree that would require any additional upland facilities.